Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. We'll start off here. Just to tell, for the record, tell us
Okay.
your name.
Charles Baggett,
And you were born.
born in 1941, right above the old Citizen State Bank in downtown Hugo. Dr. Johnson, E.A. Johnson, who brought most of the babies in Hugo to town at that time, or into life, I guess. And it's an interesting story, too, because my dad had a dealership right behind where the old drive-through was. There was a huge ramp. If you can imagine these women pregnant, the way to get into the hospital was up this ramp. And you had to go, it had a rope at the top that they pulled one up there. They had two people that walked beside the little gurney and everything, and they'd place the women there. And of course, they were having a baby, and they needed to have the baby. But Rex came the same way, and as a kid, I would sit there and watch this. It was an ambulance that came in, not a hearse that came in. That was
right.
A guy by the name of Cood Campbell did most of that, but he'd bring people in, and right beside my dad's little business that sat in there, and this was again in 1945, and there was a ramp that went up there, a door, and when you returned with your baby, you couldn't go down the steps and everything, women could, so they came back that way. So I assume I came down that ramp when I went up went inside my mom, but
wow.
but it was just it's a unique situation, but we didn't think anything about it at the time. That's what it was.
No.
So, okay.
All right. So your parents were?
They were both Herman Baggett, and he was originally born in Detroit, Texas, on 82 over there going to Clarksville. My mom was Eigelhart was the last name, and there's a big family, and they had a dairy up by Rock Hill. It's about half a mile down the road toward the Salt Creek landing, and they had a dairy there when I was small, of course, I remember it, and she and her sister milked 20-something cows, I believe it was, of a morning, and then they helped with the meal in the afternoon, and two other sisters milked them three sisters milked them that evening, and I thought, man, I don't even want to be in the dairy business. That's 365 days a year. But lots of good times out there on that.
Would that be right around where Mary Fico's house is now?
No, it's on down at where the, I can't even think of the names here, Bodine, girl that, do you know where Rock Hill School was? Out on 93, okay. It's 2 miles north of the circus ground there, where you turn to go down to the lake, to the right. Half a mile down that road. Used to just, solid black land down there, and it is gooey and everything, but he had apparently a nice operation. I never did see the dairy, but and he would sell milk.
Right.
But his name was Eigelhart.
Well, that's something we can do some more work on,
Right.
yes. Okay, what do you remember about your parents?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful life. We were not rich by any means when Dad, of course, and Herschel Pence tells me this story. I didn't know it. I asked him one day, I said, Herschel, I found a card from my dad, and it said Hugo Ford Company, and he said, yeah, that's right. And I said, sell me. I said, my dad never sold Fords, never had and he said, well, and it said Hugo Ford. I had the card. He said, yeah. And he told me right where the building was located. It's kind of just behind Ford's old grocery down on Duke Street. And I said, that can't be. He would have told me. He said, no, what happened? I said, the war broke out. I said, there was a guy by the name of Presley Cole that was his partner, and said he was an Indian guy that had a lot of money, and this house over, I don't know, on Jefferson, Joey Brindley lived in it at one time. They
Okay.
grew up there. It's that big two-story, and I guess it's on corner 800 block. Beautiful house. Mr. Cole built that. Had two boys, one a little older than me, one a little younger. He bought the Ford deal, and Dad was basically running.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad, like I say, was poor. It was an opportunity for him. The war broke out, so Dad didn't have to go to service. He went to the 3C camp, I think, during that period of time, but at Eagletown. But Mr. Cole, after the war, called Dad and said, Herman says, you like to work, I don't. I've got money, you don't. He said, we'd be a perfect team. We'll go with the partners. I can get the Buick and GMC franchise.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a tremendous businessman as far as studied a lot of things in the oil business. And so Dad says, 50-50, no money.
Right.
So Dad took over and ran it. It was Cole Baggett Motor Company, Buick GMC. That was 1945. Then he ended up buying Mr. Cole out in 19, I believe it was 52.
Mm-hmm.
He bought him out. And then I grew up, of course, in the business and changing a lot of tires. And at one time, the school teachers got a deal. Gates Tire Rubber Company. They offered I want to say it was like $2 a tire off it, but the tires were only like $10 or $12 at the time. And we had a service station with one of our dealership move locations, and it's a Phillips 66 deal, and it was located just where the furniture store now, the Hugo Furniture, they enclosed. You see these drive-through deals.
Mm-hmm.
We were in there on the corner there, east of the Erie Theater, and every teacher in town came to buy some tires, and they got this Gates Tires, what it was. Well, you know who changed them?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, Dad finally bought a deal, a rack, and it wasn't air pumps and all that where you can change tires today, but
Right.
I thought I'd died and gone to heaven when I got that rack to change tires. But I grew up there, and we went through several stores, and I ended up, after college, I came back home. I knew what I wanted to do. I grew up in it, wanted to be in the business, and my dad encouraged me to go somewhere where there was money and I'd had an opportunity to go with Phillips 66 out of Bartlesville, and he said, well, try it, and if you don't like it, you can still come here. I said, going back to Stillwater, and he convinced me. He was a good salesman. Halfway up there, I called him when I got there. I said, Dad, I wouldn't be treating them right because I'm not interested in that job. But anyway, I came back to Hugo. Don't regret it. It's been great life to raise kids in. In my class, just like I showed you a picture of the bicycle, we parked the bicycle in front of the Erie Theater or whatever theater. There were three theaters in town at that time.
Wow.
And I've got some photos for those. But we just go everywhere. You went, and no locks on the doors. You just go in and houses and things. Never had to lock anything. So it was the ideal time to be growing up, and this was the town to have it. Everybody got along.
That's good. That sounds really, really good. Okay, did your family always live here in Choctaw County, or did they
Basically
come here from somewhere else?
Yeah, they came in. Dad was in Detroit, moved, and I'm not sure the year he came, but my grandfather was a sharecropper, and he was poor, very, very poor. He did not have the opportunity to go to school. He just a wonderful guy. He loved to fish. Later on, and I said, Granddad, you been fishing lately? Nope, not since yesterday. but he loved fishing, and our family fished together an awful lot. But my mother came over. Now, Dad told me when they came across the Red River with their few possessions they had, they had they didn't even have an old car, I don't think, at that time, but whatever it was, they rode the rope ferry across
yeah.
a barge type deal across one side to the other, and my mother did too. They came out of Texas down south of Texas, Enloe, Texas, a little small community down there, and he, for some reason, my grandfather saw this property up here and bought it and put it in the dairy, and I don't know all the details, but I believe there were, let's see, 5 girls and 1 boy, her siblings. But so they've been here all that time also. But Dad, I have to tell this on my dad also, because when he went to school, and you'll be familiar, I'm sure, with things that happened, and he dropped out in the 9th grade. Mm-hmm. Main reason, well, 2 reasons. They were sharecroppers and they needed the money and the food and everything.
Yeah.
He didn't care for school, but the kids teased him about his clothes.
Right.
And he was embarrassed to go. Well, later on, when he got out and got in business, Mr. Armstrong, superintendent of school at that time, he called him and asked him to come down. He said, "I want you to run for school board." And Dad said, "Well, you don't need me." He said, I didn't make it through 9th grade. And he said, and he was embarrassed about it. All of his life he was embarrassed. And I said, "Dad, there's nothing to be embarrassed about, you know." And he said, "Well, I don't have an education." And he was so firm on that. He wanted everybody to have it, you know. Mm-hmm. And so he ran for school board and served, I don't know how many years he was on the school board here, and he said, "You're a good businessman, and that's what we need. It doesn't matter if you graduate or not, you've proven yourself." So he then, when I go on to college, and like I told you a while ago, I really didn't have my heart into it the whole time. I work in the summer and make money, and I thought, man, I could do this 12 months out of the year instead of 3. And I thought, well, I might just not go on. I'd call him. He said, "No, you stay in school." Well, when this is a story I told later on. I became the national president of the OSU Alumni Association. I worked through some chairs and things and been quite involved in it over the years. And one of the deals, I had to speak to the graduating class. I wasn't the principal speaker, but I had to speak to them. I had a 10-minute allocation or whatever, and I had to ask them to join, remember the Alumni Association, and we always gave membership. Well, I told the story about a guy that was born before the turn of the century in 1800s, late 1800s, whose son was born in 1915. His son dropped out of school and went through, told the whole story. And I said, then he had a son, and he was encouraged and could afford to go to school and college, and was blessed that he had a good family with enough money to send him to school. And I said, he went to school, didn't want to go, but he was there, and he stayed in school because his parents and everybody wanted someone from my sister went 2 years, got married, and then they go to work and didn't finish. And she was smart. I was not smart, but he. And I told this story now in graduation. There's 3,000 graduates and their parents there, and thank goodness it was out in the middle of the field and I couldn't see everybody. And I said, then that son graduated, and I said they took a photo of the 3 of them in front of the library. Mm-hmm. I said I was the 3rd proudest Baggett in that photo that day, and I've still got that. I brought a picture of those 3 of us standing in front of the library. And they were related to someone from our family finally had a college education, and that was in 1965.
Okay.
And so, but they weren't educated, but they were smart and knew the importance of an education.
Yes. How many kids were there in your family?
In mine, I have a sister that's 4 years older than I am, Peggy Cayley. and she's still alive, and just been an excellent sister. As much trouble as I gave her. No, we've always been close. We're still close today, and she was the only other one in my immediate family. And my dad had no brothers. He had a sister, the Ruth Mashburn, Joel Mashburn, and they're my first cousins, and we shared Granddad Baggett. She was a Baggett, and they live right next door to the Granddad Baggett, but they were just good people, good people. Ruth, I don't know how she could take care of so many kids and feed them and hold one and be cooking, and she was a saint. She really was, and she's looking after her husband got sick. She looked after him, still kept children as a income, but that vintage when they came back to Hugo, they had to go see Ruth. And she was just really uneducated. Well, she had a high school degree, but she never used it and never worked for anyone else to my knowledge. I don't know.
And you lived here in town? Lived
in town all my life. In fact, our dealership at one time was on the corner of 2nd and Broadway, where the gift shop is today. And a friend of mine came back for a reunion, and he was sitting in there, and he said, Charles said, you've really come a long way. And I said, well, John, I said, yeah, other than college and my 6 months in the active duty, I said, I've come 2 whole blocks. I was born 2 blocks from here.
So you were in active duty for 6 months?
Yeah, I tried to get in the Air Force. I went through 2 years of Air Force ROTC, the manual. It was required at that time. Walked in my junior year to enroll, and they took the physical, and I had a bad ear from a water skiing accident at Roebuck Lake.
Right.
So they said, your air, we can't take you. I said, mandatory something. So I waited till I graduated then, and because I want to be an officer, I'd have a degree, and I wanted to be the officer in the Air Force. Wanted to fly a jet plane, to be honest.
Right.
Everybody's dream. And I failed the physical in my senior year when I graduated. They said, well, have you ever failed the military? Well, I came home, and then they called me up to go for the draft, and I failed that physical. In fact, I failed 4 of those afterwards. Every 6 months, they'd send me back up to see it. And the last day, the one I passed, I didn't have to go through all of the deal, but I had to ride the old bus up there, and everybody that turned 18 in here, and I'd go up, and I was already in business, and it was, and the guy in front of me was trying to get out on a trick knee that wouldn't trick, and the doctor was getting frustrated. The doctor said, and he looked at me, and he said, "What's your excuse?" Intern said, "Well, sir, he's got perforated eardrum." Said, "You might better look at this one." And he said, "Or you need to see it." And he says, "We don't keep anyone out on that. Next." That's how I passed my physical.
Yep.
He followed me out the intern, and he says, "At your age, your education, you're moving to the top of the list. In 30 days, they'll draft you." And I said, "What? 30 days?" And he said, "Yeah." Well, I started looking for a unit to get into, an Air Force unit. Wanted to Fort Worth, they were full. Vietnam was heating up, and all of them got full. I wasn't man enough, I admit that right now, to be in the 45th. They were an infantry group, and they were tough and like Marines in a sense, and they'd proven their toughness. I ended up going to Antlers and joined the reserve unit there. Had some friends there and got in and went in as an enlisted man, and it was good for me. Probably my own feeling right now, and I had some guys that went through boot camp with me that came out of San Antonio, that at that time you had a choice to go off to a reform school type deal if you're in trouble, or the Army or military.
Right.
And they were some little hoodlums at times, but they came in. What I'm getting at, I would not be opposed if the draft was back in and it was required for the guys to go. I learned more first aid probably as far as learning much. The guy at the Army recruiting deal said, or at the reserve unit, he said, I said, what's the least amount of time I can be gone? I'm in business. And I'd bought some cattle at the time and everything. And he says, well, if you can qualify to be a clerk typist, I said, we can get you in back 6 months. And I said, I've always wanted to be a clerk typist. And so I went in as a clerk typist.
Okay.
But I had it was good learning experience. Served the 6 years with pride.
Right.
And had E6 ranking when I left, and a lot of good friends. Guy Bradshaw and I were in about the same time, and but I would recommend you learn patriotism. You know, I've sent several emails out there, and I see some of these protests and some of these things that are happening today, and you know, and it's going to happen. But I thought, you know, I wish they had my first sergeant. You know? They'd be proud of America. They'd be proud of America, and we're not seeing enough of that.
Yep. So what did you and your sister do in your spare time?
Growing up, when I wasn't aggravating her some way, when her boyfriend would come in at night, I'd see a little hand reach in and turn the light off. You know, I'd be waiting to turn it on. Being 4 years younger, you know how you do things like that. But we were involved in the school. We were involved. I was involved in the Nazarene church at that time. One of my dearest friends at grade school, started out grade school, a guy by the name of Jim Cummings, invited me to go to. My folks weren't attending a deal at that time, and so I went to the Nazarene church. And Jim and he got 4 or 5 of us from, I'm talking about first or second grade, and we'd go, of course I was just about a block from my house, but they came by and picked me up a couple of times with folks and stuff, but I went there, and we went on there, the 4 of us finished up and through high school, that's where we attended church. Tremendous people in that church, just really, you know, were good for me at that time, or any time. But Jim went on to be a Nazarene preacher and had a huge church in Orlando. He's passed away since then of cancer, but one of my dearest friends because of that. But you know, everybody says, "Well, what did you do back then?" Well, we just did whatever was there, you know, and you did it with whoever. When I got my first car, and I was fortunate to get a car, wasn't much car, you know, but is the first 6 or 8 that got in it was the ones we ran with that night, and it didn't matter which 8 it was. We were all friends, and we had an exceptional class. And Simon Parker would quote you today if he were alive. He said, and Ken Brown was then in it. I don't know if you're familiar with Ken, and he's got some great tapes and information on Hugo, by the way. He did one on Jamie Wolf not long before Jamie died, too. But he's a professional calligrapher, but he was president senior year. I was president the junior year of the class. But we were so close, and we've had reunions about every 5 years since then, and we're still close. But we keep in touch, and we're always doing things with each other and contacting people. But we just been a good class to have. But Simon would say, and not just because he'd come to our reunion, but he'd just say, that's the best class ever graduated from Hugo High School. And I know since then there's been some exceptional classes, and it seemed like there's classes that do stand out more than others in a sense. I know.
And that was the class of
1959.
59.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And don't say anything bad about any of us now, because we can't whip anymore. We're going to try.
Yep. What's the earliest thing that you can remember?
Oh, gosh. The earliest thing I can remember. Lots of things prior to 6th grade, of course, I remember as a child. People that influenced me, and I didn't know it at the time, but directly across the street, there was a guy by the name of, we called him Dad Watson. his job, and all the carpenters in town brought their saws there to be sharpened. You know, they'd have several sharpened, and they were little hand saws. And he was I believe Swedish. He talked with an accent, and I would go over as a small child and watch him, and he'd have me stand way back, but he'd sit there all day just grinding that his saw, and it had to be perfect, and he'd test them, people. But I remember, and he always, you know, he had the wisdom. He would just tell you stories, but he also just would tell you how you treat your fellow man, and everybody liked him. But that was impressive as far as seeing my dad didn't have the manual labor, so to speak. He was a dealer by that time. But I know there's many things that influences in your life, and many people. The Cummins family, Ann Cummins, I don't know, was married to Vaughn Patterson in our class. Okay, Ann was a cousin to Jim Cummins. They were both Nazarene, and their parents, all four of them, taught Sunday school at some level. And probably the four people, and as far as religious people that influenced me most, would be those four, because their heart was in it. They want to make sure that you had your life in order and everything. And they were very influential throughout high school.
I know Vaughn well. I lived in one of his houses.
Oh, is that? Yeah. Vaughn was. I grew up, went all the way through school. Well, I went from 4th grade, I guess, in class with him.
Okay. What about your personal heritage? Are you part Native American or?
No, none that we prove. My grandmother was on my Baggett side. In the photos, we can see the features, of course. She was alive until, I forgot the year she died, but it was around 70. I'd say in the early 70s, maybe, when she passed away. But she. I always thought she was Cherokee. She thought she did, but they didn't have a role.
Right.
But my boys are, because my wife, of course. And she's part. Her dad was Sac and Fox and Seminole, and her mother was Choctaw, and her grandfather was full blood. And Judy lives in Tulsa now. She retired. She was head of or she went to Washington D.C. as a child protection coordinator, national child protection.
Okay. What about German, Irish, English, Welsh, anything that you know of?
Just Texas, I guess.
I got you.
But Dad, she was the only one, of course, and we don't have any. We never have looked it all up. I haven't. My Regina Cayley is my Pulliam is my niece, and she keeps all those records.
Right. Did you and your family have any special traditions or things that you do for holidays or?
Sure, we usually had Christmas with the Mashburn family on Christmas. My older Mashburn boy, Howard, was born on Christmas Eve. Bless his heart, he never had a birthday party hardly, but we had Christmas here, and then we would go down to Hot Springs, where my mother's favorite sister, the one that helped her with the cows and milking, and they stayed great friends till they died. And we would go there for the deal, Christmas down there with them. And that was more or less we look forward to a good time with everybody.
Yeah.
We you go cut your own tree and put it in there, and it might be a cedar tree, whatever, but it was a Christmas tree.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about when you got married and how you and your wife met and all that good stuff.
I was from Baggett originally. Strange deal. She was she went to grade school here. I knew her, and then we went to. She went to Valiant. Her dad was killed in Normandy, and he was killed in action there, captain in the army. They're Indian descent. He was a Sac and Fox, same tribe as Jim Thorpe. And then he also was a local guy, Joe Anderson, was an insurance agent here. His name, he was with him at the time when they were storming, and he had to walk off and leave him, but when he got hit. But after my wife and I married, she never did know him. Of course, she was World War World War II, and but she never knew him. But they moved to Valiant. I went to grade school with her a couple times, a couple of years, I guess. She goes off, doesn't run into her till basically after she graduated from college and got her master's and everything. And she came in and saw her one night, and then the next night or week or two, she said, "I want to buy a car to go to Alaska." And she bought. I ordered a special car with Positrack rear axle and everything, no air conditioning stuff. And so the time she ordered it and time it came in, we'd dated quite a bit, but anyway, I ended up going all the way to Alaska to get her, bring her back. But anyway, it was. But she was from Valiant, and some good people down there, good people. In fact, my mother-in-law, first year we was married, Halloween I got her a new broom. Took it in. And my wife said, "You're pushing this a little," I think. I said, "Nah." I said, she'll like it. And so I said, "I thought every old witch needed a new broom for Halloween." She called everybody in Baggett, telling her about her son-in-law bring her. But we had a good relation. But all
That's
right.
good.
Yeah. Well, like I said, she was going to go to Alaska. They went to grade school here. She and her mother was a legal secretary for Hal Welch.
Yeah.
Okay, it was Hack's dad.
Yeah.
Quite a well-known lawyer at that time. She worked for him. I knew Judy and Doug when they were in grade school just a little bit. He was a year behind me, and she was 2 years behind me. But I was playing ball at recess and shooting marbles, whatever. So didn't know much about her. Knew Doug, everything. And then they moved, and when her mother remarried later, but her mother worked at Wheelock, and she was raised by her grandfather down by, or she and Doug were during much of their life, particularly in the summers, down by Redland in McCurtain County. And she went on to college, and I never did see her again until after she was out of college. And when I saw her and asked for a date, and we went out, and she was telling me her desire. She'd been working in Alaska. She had an aunt, Juanita Garnick, that was living in Alaska, sister of her mother's. She'd gone up there and taught school at the very first, and just loved it, and retired up there. And so she said, I've worked up there and lived with them every summer, she and her husband, and worked for the federal government on kind of a, I forget what you call them, but anyway, she said, I'm going back to Alaska. Well, we dated a few times. She came in and ordered a car special that would go up there, and it had Positrack, no air conditioning, and but we equipped it for Alaska.
Right. Yes.
And back, well, it came in, by the time it came in, I nearly asked her to stay here, and I was getting pretty serious about her, and then I went up to see her over the Labor Day weekend. I'd never been to Alaska, and I thought, well, I want to go see it, and so we went up there, and we decided at that time we'd get married. We did, after I said, well, you're going to come back here. Well, her brother drove her up there, and so she said, well, I don't know. He said, I can't come back by myself. So I said, well, we can get married up there. And so she said, well, I hate to do that, but it says I can't drive all the way back by myself,
Right.
And so I said, well, we'll get married up there, which was a little downer. My mother didn't get, my sister kind of eloped, and she was wanting to see her son get married, but it was December 13th, cold, snowy, and it's Juneau, Alaska. It wasn't as bad as part of Alaska, but she didn't get to see either child and get married. When the preacher interviewed us, he said, "Well, are any of your friends coming?" And I said, "Well, no, they can't come up here for my friends aren't that wealthy.
Right.
Are your folks coming? Or do they approve of this marriage?" You know, and I said, "Well, sure, they approve of it." And I said, "My friends aren't marrying her." You know, I didn't understand all this stuff. But anyway, we were married there, and it was and we had to ship the car back the day we were married, and a ship to Seattle, and we flew there and waited for the car to come because it was icy, and we drove in from there. And the first time after I left Seattle, the first time I saw the pavement was just north of Denver. It was icy and everything, but the car was equipped with like studded tires, things like that.
Right.
But we got all the way home before Christmas. We were married on the 13th, and after we left Seattle with the car, and it was iced over when it got there. But so we drove on in and got here to show off my new bride.
Yeah, and that was in what year?
1967.
67. Okay. Children?
Two boys. We had Greg December 2nd, 1971. Was born. Good. I was the last Baggett male, and so you, not that it matters two generations later, whatever, if it drops out, but so and him. Then, so he was healthy and very healthy. Well, a year and 17 days later, Joel was born, and. She was not happy that close together, of course, but it's been great because they grew up together and they've just been real. They're still friends. They both took jobs in Tulsa. Later on, Greg first went to Dallas area. He was a year older. They both joined the same fraternity.
Okay.
Greg became president of the fraternity. I was never in a fraternity, but he became president. And then the next year, Joel came up and he picked the same way like the guys there and everything. He'd been up before, and he joined that fraternity. Ironically, they both go to the same church. Joel shopped around quite a few places, but and we're Methodist and family, and Judy's Methodist, and I switched my deal there. Well, they found this church first of all, and they found homes. And Greg married about 3 or 4 years before Joel, and they found homes, and they live about a mile apart. And of course, they grew up doing our TV commercials for us on as the Baggett boys, and they're active at Methodist Church on 91st up there, Faith United. They both joined their families, and they're very active in that. But they both found the same church that they liked, and they didn't go together when they went. They just said, "Hey, I like the way that everything working here," and it is quite a large church. And they I have to tell this, and our church here is small, of course, as far as attendance, and their church had a lot of young people, which is, but I was. He'll kill me for telling this, but I told him in front of his Sunday school class, so I guess it'll be all right. One day, my wife, when they were here, and he has a driver's license, and I had a curfew. It was 12 o'clock on Friday and Saturday nights both, and it was 12 o'clock. It was not 12:01, and they understood that, and they would call me if they were running 12:01. They'd stop somewhere and call because they knew that it would be a punishment. And I never had to do it, but Joel ran a lot with Bill Jenkins, and they'd have a movie or a program going off at 12, and he'd call and he said, "It's going to be about 12:03 before I get home on my motor scooter." But Greg, one day, Judy says, I've hollered to him 3 times Sunday morning, and he says, he said it doesn't feel good. I said, all right. So I go in and I said, what's the matter, son? He said, well, Dad, said, I need some rest. I said, no, well, you're the one that's staying out and running around at night. Well, says, I don't know. So I just like to rest in today because they wash cars on Saturdays and stuff, and worked for me. And I said, well, you got the 6-day virus. And he said, do what? I said, yeah, 6 day. And ironically, there's one of his best friends is in the Sunday school class up there is a doctor. And I told him, I said, Doc, you ever heard of the 6-day virus? He said, no. And I said, well, Greg had it one time. And I said, Greg said, well, I don't know, Dad. And I said, well, the 6-day virus, son, let me explain it to you. You're going to feel fine when we get out of church today. You'll be ready to eat. When we're going to eat lunch, blah, blah. I said, and then you're going to want to run out and you'll go out and you'll run around with your friends again Sunday afternoon. You'll be whatever y'all do on Sunday afternoons, and everything. That's fine. But I said, next Saturday night, that virus is coming back. You're not going out because you'll be sick. Too sick to go.
Yep.
He looked at me and he knew I was telling the truth. And it was amazing. He got well pretty quick and was at church. But I asked him up there, I said, he said, can you tell us anything on Greg? I said, yeah, I can tell you about his 6-day virus. but they were we were fortunate. There was a preacher by the name of George Warren he had smaller boys, but was just one of those, and we had a good youth group, and they would go skiing, and there'd be people from other church, people that didn't go to church anywhere. But there were like 20 of them in the group that just and they went skiing every year, and I told someone the other day, I said, good Lord looks after me because he let those boys be born and go through the time when we had the best youth person as preacher we've ever had, and ironically, George came to each boy's wedding when they got married. He made and we're still close. And then when this Juanita, Judy's aunt, died, he did the service. He and I did the service for her. But he was just the perfect time, and he influenced a lot of people, a lot of these kids around today.
What would you consider to be the most important historical events that you've seen in your lifetime?
Historic.
Yeah, just historical
event. Okay.
Yeah.
Gosh, I'd have to think on that. Worldwide, it's I've been blessed that I've been able to go see various things and be impressed. Like it's a simple thing, but it's the Eiffel Tower was not an event as such, but I was so amazed. I walked back down 2 or 3 times, or I walked back one night for sure to see, and couldn't understand how in 1891 that they could build these beams. We didn't have helicopters to hold that beam in place. We didn't have big steel cranes to do anything, and how they could put together so the legs are a block apart, and that it was so impressive that they had that. And then I get amazed at how the skills of the workmen back then, as the guy that did those saws, and the craftsmen, those people that did the work. You go to Tulsa today and see all the, if you look on top of the buildings, the different sculpture. There's up there in Europe, I'm amazed. I love Switzerland and just amazed at how, all these years in Rome and all this, stood there on Mars Hill and thought, gosh, this right here's where Paul would give his speech.
Yeah.
But it was, I don't know, there's all this world, the invention, and my deal is automobiles.
Right. Yes.
I've seen automatic transmissions in my time.
Yeah.
I've seen air conditioning in cars in my time. Just V8 engines, just remarkable. Dad was telling me one time, and I don't know if you've seen the pictures probably of the courthouse when it had the dome on it and the big columns in front. In fact, I don't remember the dome. Someone said, "Well, is that since you were born?" I said, "Well, courthouse wasn't interesting to me at that time," but it was a beautiful structure. And Dad told me when he was a young boy, and they lived at Messer at that time, and he said he remembered coming to town, and there was a guy had the Star automobile that came through, a big spoke wheel deal, and the Star automobile had three. You could take one wheel off, and it would stay level. Either any wheel on the car, you could drive it with three wheels, and if you had a bed flat or something, you didn't ruin a tire. But it would also, the guy took it up on the steps of the courthouse down there. Dad witnessed it, and it was just amazing. And of course, my dad traded cars during the war or before the war and everything. He made a living, and he could mechanically work on them. I was fairly talented early, but today I can't even turn my radio on. I've seen such an advance in the automobile industry, and I've been blessed to serve on the National Buick board with Buick, representing the smaller dealers in 4 states, I guess at that time, as their representative for a couple of years. And go to Flint, Michigan, and go to discuss problems we're experiencing, and it was a good deal. But we've been very, very close politically, our family, with people. Governor Raymond Geary and Dad were close. He just was one of those guys and this is an interesting story too. Dad wanted me to come by I was in junior high, and when he was running for governor, and he said, and W.C. Hacker, and I've got a photo in this information I've got you, had a Hacker's Hardware at that time, and he was related. He married a Fry that had the Fry Lumber Company, and all there's several of those good people. Fry's, they had. He said, the governor's going to be through, and I want you to meet the governor. So, of course, one of the deals I did every day when I got out of school was stop by the ice cream deal in the corner of the street there, Graves Drug Store, and there were 3 places that kids could hang out, but I'd stop by and get an ice cream cone. Well, I go on the back, go on the Hackers, a block away. It was right across from where the newspaper is now, and I go in, I've got an ice cream cone, shaking hands with the governor of the state of Oklahoma. I didn't, what's the governor of the state of Oklahoma to me, so to speak. Well, that was like junior high. My sister's 4 years older, and so we were up seeing her now about 4 years later, and we're in the Union Building, and she'd gone to work for Merle Rogers, who was at the time my dad was president of the Chamber of Commerce. Merle Rogers was the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce here. Merle was at Live Wire in the glove factory building. Wells Lamont, and my dad taught me, and we both were active in industrial development and everything for the Botec, for the county, and always interested. Of course, we had a business here. We wanted, but we wanted people working, we wanted people making money. Well, Wells Lamont had an interest here, and Dad and Merle Rogers and a few of those flew up 2 or 3 times to Chicago, and they came back, and good people, and they set in the glove factory. Wasn't a big paying job, but it was a job, and people needed jobs. And it was, you had to be, it was sewing and stuff. They made the White Mule glove, and but then you had to have the building. And Merle Rogers would have pie suppers, whatever. He raised more money to build that building out there. It wasn't as large as it is now, but they enlarged it one time. But then they made a go of it for years. It was there in operation, and I just really feel that that was something needed there. Well, Merle Rogers left here to go on, and they started the Alumni Association of all things at Oklahoma A&M, and he was the first one. And I recall going up there, and he was just live wire at that. Also, he was at the ball games, telling them to hold up the cards, and when it first went on TV one time, and he was down there with a speaker horn trying to get everybody's attention.
Yeah.
The students weren't interested in doing like that. But anyway, my sister went to work for him because she knew him here and Dad, and so she went to work in his office and worked, I guess, the 2 years for him until she quit. Well, we were in the Union building, and I'm running ahead. She's showing them pictures on the wall, and I'm not really interested. I'm in high school by now, but and so she's. I turn around the corner there, and I look up and I see the Governor Gary coming down the deal with President Wilhelm, I guess it was, and some other people and Highway Patrol.
Yeah.
And it's been 2 or 3 years since the ice cream deal.
Yeah.
And he says, "Well, Mr. Baggett, what are you doing? You're a long way from home." And
Wow.
And so about that, he says, "Is your dad here?" Yes, he's right around the hall. So Dad turned around the corner right at that time. But it was, it was quite an experience for me that the Governor. I was more formal at that time. I said, "So, but you don't have an ice." He remembered the ice cream cone.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was impressive to him. Some kid. Then Wes Watkins and I were not friends at OSU, but we were in some things together. He was he was just student body president at OSU, and we ran across each other at times. And later on, he came down, and we formed the Comanche Economic Development District in Wilburton, and Wes said, "I want you to get on that board." And I said, "Well, Wes, I can't. I got a business to run, and I can't run to Wilburton on every Thursday or one time a month." And I said, "I just can't." But you don't tell him that, he doesn't hear that. And kind of like Rabbi Estes that used to live here, he couldn't hear you turn down anything, and he just said, "Oh, you'll do it all right. You'll make it fit." But so I'm on the Keto board, and I'll never forget, we were sitting there one day or at a meeting, and he was just excited, and he says, "There's back in South or North Carolina, I'm not sure now, but he says, I'd like to get permission to fly out and look at a Votech system they have there." And so we heard about it, he told us about it, and that was a 7-county district, Keto, and still is. And he said, "I'd like to know." Well, he called a special meeting when we got back and said, he was so excited. He said, "We can have it in Oklahoma." Says, "We can have 3 Votech buildings in the 7 counties."
Right.
And we were beside ourselves at the time, just thinking, wow, but he had to get some laws passed, and we had the rulings, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you voted, and well, Wes came down, and Wes was from Bennington originally, and he came down. We went to Boswell. He knew a lot of the merchants over there, and they were just not as excited about it. And my own father, he said, "Son, I'm for it because you and Wes are and we need it." But he said, "It will go to Idabel because there's more students in McCurtain County, and they'll get it." And that was kind of the deal on something like that at that time. And I said, "Well, it's closer than Okmulgee." And so Wes just couldn't believe it. We was over Ardmore, and at Boswell, and he couldn't convince those people. It's just a small millage. It wasn't expensive, but it was an increase in taxes, and several of the local merchants were just not jumping all over it either.
Right.
And so Wes, he was devoted to his wife. He told her, and he was always late, but he says, it was her birthday, I believe it was, and folks were coming down from not Cushing, and And he told me, he says, and he asked me, he said, can you meet me at the Y? And I said, because I need to be back at Wilburton tonight by 6 o'clock. I said, sure. Well, we're at Boswell at 5.
Yeah.
I said, Wes, we got to go. You know, you got this deal. He said, well, he called from the payphone, of course. Said, I know I'm running late, and I'll be there. And she was used to it, but bless her, she's as sweet as she can be. But so anyway, he went. I let him out, and he took off up there, and I didn't realize the importance of it. Well, he called and he said, Miller, this is kind of disappointed. I said, Wes, I got to think about this. We got this, and as president, we formed a JC chapter at the time here, and really had some good people. We had about 30 members, and I brought a photo of how we got membership. I said, I know how to get membership, but we're going to make your wives mad. And they said, I said, we'll go get a billy goat, and we'll park in the front yard with a little sign and some food and everything. And the sign says, I'm here till this JC gets a new member. We doubled our membership in a week.
Well,
that goat got to where he would stink. And I'd put him in the back. I'd pull up in my pickup. He'd happen to see me, and he'd jump up in the back of the pickup, and I'd take him somewhere else. He had a list. Everybody had the list. Now, if they got a member before then, they'd go to their house, and so they got to doing that shortly.
Right.
But one lady, she still would laugh about it now, but she didn't laugh that day. She said, "Get that goat out of my yard." She had nice yard and everything. And I said, "You need to talk to your husband." And she said, "I'm talking to you. You brought him. You get him out." I said, "You talk to your husband. I'll be back. If he got a new member, he got a new member." but it worked, and we doubled up the membership. But the guys were. I said, "You know, guys, I went down to the courthouse, and the amount of people that were voting on special elections where there's not another election, special elections, people didn't turn out, and they didn't vote. There'd be, and I think at that time, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, I went to the courthouse other then, they didn't have these records, they couldn't find them, but I wanted to know how many exactly voted there. There were normally about 600 people would vote, that's all. And I don't know, it's about 800 now, I think they say, on special elections countywide.
Yeah.
Well, I told Wes, and of course he thought, no, we got to settle on our theme and everything, and he was a politician, and I said, well, we need to get it voted for, and we needed to win it. So I go to JC's, and I said, how many people, we got right at 60 people here, how many you control? Your wife, we know, so there's 120 votes.
Right.
You know? And I said, can you get your parents or friends, whatever, how many, next week, report to me. So they came back in, well, I got 6. At church even, I said, hey, this is really a good deal and everything. Well, we ended up, we could account for about 400 and something votes that we knew, and if we had to take them ourselves, and we stayed with it. And Wes would just, he said, I need to come back and go back to Boswell. I said, no, we got this taken care of. You go someplace else and do it. And so we ended up and we were the biggest percentage of vote in the whole deal, only because we didn't tell people to come vote. Now how important it was. We controlled it. And so when it passed, I remember the newspaper came out and it says, Hugo comes out smelling like a rose, because McCurtain voted it down that first time, and Push voted down. One of the schools was going to be in Hugo.
Right.
It was a delight to know.
Yeah.
And so we got the school, and then we hired later on a school board, and then they hired Bill Powers as the to manage it. But that's the way Hugo got the school, and it was just because we didn't go out and try to get people to vote for it. Now that's a shame to say, but it worked that way, and we controlled it, and it's been such an asset to us. Gosh, just anything educational or trade wise, we needed it so bad. And then of course, then later they came along and put the one that the other counties voted in. They had to vote again.
Oh yeah.
But it's been a great deal for us.
It has been. It really has.
Yeah.
So now we're going to get into more of the local stuff.
Okay.
So you brought some pictures, so just feel free to talk about anything
yeah.
local you want to talk about.
I mentioned the dealership, and above the hospital I had a picture that showed that ramp, and that you could have too. That one picture, it has to be, and I don't know where that place was. I was going to leave it with you so that you could find out. It's a store that, and back the date on it was 1907. Yeah, so we were stayed to it, and I assume it's in Hugo. And someone told me that thought it might even be down in Fort Townsend, but I didn't recognize that name. But I had
store, 1907.
Yeah, and back in the old days, the Dirks was the name of it. It had the and they had a general store for the employees that had cheaper rate, and they sold them stuff, and it was kind of just a department store. You could buy whatever you wanted there, and that's the old operators. Number, please.
Looks like they had quite a few of them.
They did, a lot of ladies. That was probably the best job for one guy. Wayne Bradshaw's mother might have been in that photo. I don't know, but you'd pick up the phone and say, I'd call someone and they say, "Oh, they're not home." No, that's you've probably got pictures like that of downtown Hugo.
Now, is this looking north? Probably.
No, let's see. That's the old People Store. That's where the bank is on the corner.
Okay.
Down here, that's looking south from Broadway.
Okay, I got
across the street.
Yeah.
I brought a picture of the old fireplace and the old fire station that was on the corner down across from Wallace Motors, Catty Corner. Where the Chamber of Commerce.
Where the Chamber of Commerce is now. Yes.
They had a brass pole. The guys lived up there, and the alarm go off. They go jump on the pole. Howard's, the Mashburn dad worked there at the time, and we'd go and jump on that pole and slide down. Brought this folks. She was Irma Moore. Had a Four Brothers Cafe, little trolley car type cafe that you go in. She knew the information. She'd had so many people in that morning, and this just read through them. It's a small picture of the Baggett boys, the original Baggett boys, I called it. Years ago, we at Halloween at the Armory building. That was a big deal, and we had a big, and everybody, the little kids wore their suits, and it was kind of a trick or treat there as such. But we also had a deal to raise money, and it was small money. You got so many votes for a penny, I guess. I don't know, maybe it was $1, whatever the votes were counted. But they'd have a king and queen, all four classes. We had, all four were in this. And the president of the class would be there standing with them, and then someone was elected as a candidate on that deal. And that's Mandy Welch and John Abels on that one. That was Hal Welch's daughter. Then this was Linda Sue Fellows. Mrs. Fellows was a music teacher, and she went from one school to the other. She was a candidate. And right here's Tony Byard. Tony Love here, and that's my cousin Johnny Mashburn. And they were on that one. Some great pictures here of like Ike Simpson and some of the people that were on the state Sandlot team.
Okay.
The old junior high building. On rainy days, I played many times on that porch as a kid because we couldn't play anywhere else. But there'd be a group of us just.
Now, exactly where was this?
Where the junior high is over here now. It was. In fact, there's a picture. And this was facing east.
Okay.
And it was. And then they built a wing over here first. The I went to school in this building first, and
Okay.
I don't think I have a picture of a big Christmas play we had in there. I mean, it was I was a little bitty guy, and I was one of the three kings or whatever. That was, but we dressed all up in a big play for the whole school,
Right.
but it had a big auditorium upstairs. The school, they built onto it and joined this school, and then later they tore this one down and built the gymnasium and everything.
Right.
Our class was the first one to graduate from that gymnasium.
Okay.
We were the first ones we were the first ones, on the gym. We were the first ones to enter the school. In fact, we went to 7th grade at various grade schools for about the first 4 months. They didn't have it completed.
Yeah.
We were supposed to move, so we went to our new junior high.
Right.
Here's the Hugo Hospital. There,
Oh, goodness.
now that was up on top of the Jackson Hill, where the turned to go to Clayton Avenue Baptist, right on that corner.
Okay. Yeah.
It was Dr. Kenega, Kenega, I believe, and he and another doctor, I forgot the name, but I nearly said it, but he was the primary person.
Okay.
That's a little drive-in that Leoma Caldwell grew up selling ice cream, and they had twin windows there. You'd go to either window, get in. Got a picture here of my dad on the elephants. He's
Oh, wow.
he loved he loves the circus, and I did too. We've all
Yeah.
been close to the circus family for years. That was my dad at CCC camp
Okay.
in Eagletown. That was a big project. They had them scattered all around,
Yeah,
as you know.
My dad was at one in Colorado.
Is that right?
When Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dad was there, and I don't know exactly years. And I ended up, I don't know if you knew Jim Jacobs. That was on. He was in my class, but he was searching one time. He said, "You don't know anyone? What company is your dad in?" I told him. He said, "That's the only photo we don't have." And I said, "Well, I've got a photo of it, and it's on one of those roll out that's long ones, and everything." So I rolled it, and he came by one day. He says, "I'd like to take it over to Paris and get it put on the disc and make."
Yeah.
And he said, "But I want you to go with me. I won't be responsible."
Right.
I said, "Jim, take it." His classmate of mine. I said, "Just take it." And so he took it over, and it's down at the Broken Bow now at the.
Right.
This was a class interesting to me because I had so many friends in it. That's Lanny Nash, and then that's as can't mention or go I'm sorry.
That's all right.
That's up the camera there. Deer in Moorhead now, but Deer in the Spear was her name. Carolyn Fry is in here. That's her right there.
Oh, okay.
A lot of the teachers were in here. In fact, this boy right here was, I'm not sure. Yeah, that's Judy's brother when he was in grade school, a year behind me. This was this boy here was Joe Anderson Jr. We called him Joe Boy. He was killed in a car wreck, and when he was going to OU, but his dad was the one that was with Judy's dad when he got killed in Normandy. But that class is interesting because and then Lanny Nash, my best friend. I love those pictures of those grade schools.
Oh yeah.
I've got a bunch.
Who's the teacher?
That was a Mrs. Brown. They said I never did have her. I went over there. I went to fourth ward for the first 4 years.
Yeah.
My dad bought a house, and it was on North Broadway. We had it moved in, and they redid it, and it was going to be nice. And again, it dates me, but it was probably somewhere around 4 years old before we had an indoor plumbing. And of course I was used to it at my grandparents' places. But we got a bathroom and enclosed a porch and put everything, put a shower in. So, but fourth grade, and my friends were at Fourth Ward and moved over there, and I was going to have to go to First Ward.
Right.
And I had about 2 months later, I guess, 2 months left in the school deal, and finally they convinced me that I could stay this year, but I'd have to go next year. I said. And I rode my bicycle and I said, look, there's so many, I'm only so many blocks here.
Right.
This one's like 11 blocks, whatever it was, and I may have stretched it a little. I said, I need to go to Fourth Ward, 5th grade. Nope, broke my heart,
Yep.
And of course, it turned out to be good.
And that's the way it was then. Each ward had its own elementary.
Each one had its own elementary, and they were close. We played against each other in sports and things, and then this was the old Paris grocery building.
Okay.
It was a huge building, a big, large building, and now the barbecue deal down there, the Buffalo.
Oh, yeah.
But this was Baggett Motor Company, where I told you about, next to the furniture store.
Yeah.
There was the cutout there.
Yeah.
On the catty corner across the block was the Jordan Bus Company.
Okay.
And that was quite a big operation.
Yeah.
And y'all remembered Howard Harrison, train engineer, was big active on.
I've
heard of it?
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
This was his son Toby, and he was a year behind me, but I was pumping gas in his motorcycle at that time.
Okay.
This band, I was in a high school band, I think, in the 4th or 5th grade even, but I could, this down here, they were in uniform, and I didn't march with them because couldn't get up early and march with them, but that was another couple, Ken Brown and
okay.
That's Ken and Florence Marie Patterson, Vaughn's sister.
Okay.
And then and this was me my junior year with Sally Murray. This was Sandy Glaze and Ralph Simmons. They were candidates. It was a big deal.
Yeah, it looks like it was a big deal.
I remember my girlfriend told me that I better not kiss Sally if you had to kiss her when you crowned her.
Yep.
And she was the queen. She was the class behind me. She gave me strict instruction. I was afraid we were going to win. That was Dr. Johnson. That brought most of the babies into the world at that time. They were here. He was kind of a Billy Goat gruff as such.
Yeah.
And even when you went to him later, I didn't go with Dr. Johnson. You thought he didn't like kids, but he brought so many kids into this world.
Yeah.
And that was just a picture of our old dealership. And we were like every car dealership, I guess, in the time, but my dad was kind of a trader to start with anyway, and we traded for a couple of donkeys. And one of my fellow church members even said he couldn't figure out which ones were the donkeys or which ones were the people and which was the other name for us. Just boat. This place we trade for over there, water cool. That was a water cool. Rare motor. One of the finest gentlemen I believe I've ever known, and just true gentleman, was Freckles Brown. And he would come in and buy a car from us, not very often.
Right.
And in his pickups, he usually found him a used pickup, but in fact, one night I picked him up, and I was in high school. Mm-hmm. I was dragging Jackson again, and whatever, like you did, and I saw a guy get off right after he came in here. I thought, no, I was in college even. Yeah, I was already out. I was back here, and I saw this guy get out of a car or pickup, and it had a horse trailer, but it turned going into Texas, right downtown, and he got some rigging out. He had his little bag and crippled up. I don't know if you ever saw him before he died, but he stove up, and he started walking west. And we're talking about 11 o'clock at night or so. And I said, that's Freckles Brown.
Yeah.
So I pull up and I said, Mr. Brown, need a ride? He said, well, if you're going my way, I said, well, I'll take you. He said, you can't walk that far, you won't get there.
Right.
And so he said, well, I don't want to do that. And he tried to pay me. I drove him on over there to his house that night and brought him back. I'll never forget, his key word, and I can still see him grinning. I said, much obliged. That was what the old timer said, so to speak. He never forgot. He'd come by a car. He'd come down there and buy. Of course, he and Dad were friends at the time too. But he would never charge us. Wouldn't I said, I'd like to use it in an ad, and he said, sure, no problem.
Yeah.
I showed this earlier. My first year when I built the new facility,
right.
We were Buick, Pontiac, and GMC for years.
Yes.
We finally, I got the Chevrolet franchise. We'd tried for years. I said, I'll build you a new building if you want it. And so we got the franchise. And the good Lord woke me up one night, and I was dreaming about that. And I wrote it down. So I put it together the next day with how it could be done and where. It's on the slope, as you know, out there. People would drive by. There was a Christmas ad. Merry Christmas. And we moved in we moved in on Memorial Weekend that year, and I said, I don't mind those cars.
What year was this?
That was in it would be 1986.
86.
Yeah, May, in Memorial Weekend. It was airline people even fly over and seen it, from above. Then I have the Smith Luton. He was a pharmacist. The son was a pharmacist at Palace Drug. I don't think he went to pharmacy school, and then my cousin Joel Mashburn went to pharmacy school and joined him there. But Smith was big in the community as far as he loved Little League baseball. And the JCs, we came in, you had to pay to get the fair for years on the program. So JC decided we were going to fill up every booth in the whole deal, and it was a big long building beside the ballpark out there, and it was, and we had display places. And I think it was 20-something businesses that could display, and it would always be 6 or 8 before, and it was just, and you paid, and you had the carnival, and that was what most people went.
Right.
We decided to have a free fair, and so we told all the merchants, we're going to get people out there, it's going to be free, so you're going to, we filled the whole building with things. But these guys, greatest bunch of guys you ever worked with in your life, just like that voting on the VOTEC.
Yeah.
They were instant Hugo, and we had linemen for public service, we had firemen, we had whatever they had. But Smith's dad had a trading post down there, and he had a stagecoach inside that building on display. But he was quite a character. He played the part well. This is I wrote you an article also of the. Mentioned earlier about when they had some arguments about our circus, and I believe let me see that one moment.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
The circus.
Oh,
people,
you wrote that article.
I wrote this article to the Daily Oklahoma because they were so far off beat on how these elephants are treated better than any horse in the state, and this. The Carson Barnes Circus, I forget what year they started the Hugo School Foundation. $140,000 gift was what they started with it. And I told them how important they were to our community, and they come back here and they'd buy hay and whatever. And they treat those elephants, they live good, very good. I mentioned this earlier. This is a picture of up till that time, 1977. I guess the presidents of the Chamber of Commerce, Dad and I were involved. But I became president and was the first father-son president. And then Stan Stamper and Jack was, and then Stan when he came back.
Right.
There's the photo of I was third proudest Baggett that day. They were both happy, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
This is the governor that I shook hands with the ice cream cone, Governor Raymond Gary. Very, very religious man and Baptist. He put in a home with my deal for years, he and his brother. And that was down at the other place where we moved.
Okay, yeah, so this is when you moved it over.
Yeah, that came along.
Yeah.
I traded for that airplane one time.
Yeah. I heard about this. I worked with a guy, and he said he came up and visited with you at your dealership once, and you showed him this picture. And you said you'd trade for anything.
Yeah, right. And that was interesting. The guy told me, he was at the coffee shop, at the donut shop.
Yeah.
And Gorman, lots of times I'd pick up new cars up to get gas when I'd fill them up. I started that before General Motors and all the others started doing it. I knew what a gas tank, I figured it in my cost factor, but anyway, I said, well, I'm going to give you free first tanks on me, and that Goodwill. That's what they do, so Gorman said, boy, there's a blue and silver and Dallas Cowboys coming in, and he was a fan, and he says, he told me, he said, I'll give you X number of dollars in my airplane for her.
Okay.
He'd learned to fly VC Steefer. I don't know if you ever knew VC. He taught a lot of people and how to fly, and that was just a little small aircraft.
Okay.
And I said, well, I never owned an airplane before. And he stood in front of all the people there, and what the offer he gave me, and it happened to be that VC Steefer, who had owned that plane twice before, I think, teaching people how to fly. I walked over to him like I was getting another cup of coffee, and I said, what's that plane worth? And he told me. Well, I had some money made right there, more than normal even. And I said, I thought, so I go back and I said, I believe I never owned an airplane before. I think I'll just buy that. I'll just trade with you. He said, all right, I'm serious. I said, I am too. And so everybody at the table, there's a big talk of town. I traded for it right there at the donut shop and took his deal. And have them thought I was stupid, and which I'd already proven that several times. But so Gorman came in and said, hey, I know there's a crowd there, and we got carried away. If you don't want to trade, I don't want to hold you to it. I said, no, deal's a deal. And so, I was wanting to bring it down and put it on a car lot, but they wouldn't let you do that, of course. But I already had it sold when I traded for it, but we got good publicity out of it. But we did. We traded for everything. I traded for. That was my dad when they came out of the.
Oh goodness.
That was called a Buick Century in 1956, and it had the big engine in it, the Roadmaster engine, and a special body, and it was run. And then that's the picture of the Jordan buses. They bought some new ones. That was quite an operation, and one man owned them all here in Hugo. And
really?
In fact, his home was just on Jackson Street here, over by where Kevin Corey in that neighborhood. But it was a big two-story. He was a very wealthy guy. Abner Jordan, Jordan Bus Company. I would ride. My dad would get me out of school, or he'd say at noon he'd come in and say, "I've got a car in Dallas, a new car." We didn't stock a lot of new cars. None of the dealers at the time. General Motors had a lot, and you could call if you needed a white Buick LeSabre. It wasn't LeSabre back then, Century or whatever. But if you needed one, you called General Motors, and they say, "We've got it at the warehouse in Dallas, blah blah blah," and then they build it directly to you. You had to pick it up there. Well, I was 16, and Dad had me going everywhere, and I'd go in and talk to Simon Parker, Mr. Parker, and say, I said, "Boy, Dad's got this car in Dallas. He sure needs it back today, and you can't find anyone. Go get it." He said, and he'd sit there and listen to it. And I told this when I gave the eulogy at his service, but I said he'd reach in there in his left hand, and he'd reach that drawer. I knew I had him, and he said, "Baggy," he said, "sometime bread and butter is a little more important than education. But I was a good student. He'd give me a pass for about the last 2 or 3 hours of our class. And I'd run down the deal, and they'd take me out the edge of the highway, because if he gave me enough money, I'd ride this Jordan bus to Durant.
Right.
Well, if I hitchhiked, I could keep that money, Jordan bus money, to Durant. If I didn't, they'd stop and pick you up.
Yeah.
So they picked me up those times I couldn't catch a ride, and then I'd catch the Continental Trailways bus that came through there.
Yeah.
And it went on down to Dallas, and they'd drop me off down there at this location, about where Medical City is. And of course, it wasn't near as big in that time, but then I'd walk over to the deal about 2 blocks away, and I'd get the car and head back to Hugo, and I'd be back to Hugo about 10 o'clock at night. But I did quite often on school nights too, but it was part of the deal, and like you said.
Now, help me out.
Okay.
Whereabouts
That's
was this?
Palace Drugstore.
Right.
Right. Right up here.
So
That's a Davidson Jewelry.
Yeah,
okay.
Davidson Jewelry.
That was, Palace had a little room right beside it.
Yeah.
Okay. That was the Davidson Jewelry originally, and Mr. Davidson, quite a guy. He was our next door neighbor. The 2-story house that Peggy and Arvo had. He built it, I guess, new.
So it's just right on Broadway.
Right on Broadway, and then that's down there at the corner of the City Drug.
There's the City Drug.
Okay, and they stretched out the cars there. That's another one that. Okay, here's one that I was telling you about the ramp. This is. This was Cole Baggett Motor Company. See this shed here?
Yeah.
This door went up to that outside shed, and you have to, it had steps on the side of a rail that you hook the gurney on. There was no way it was going to get off a track.
Right.
But you better have enough people that could hold a rope and pull them up. But,
so they go in this door, and they go up that ramp to up here where the shed is.
Yeah.
Now go deliver the kids and take people in.
Now you go to the hospital and through the front steps from around on the street corner but this is the Citizen Banks over here.
Yeah.
There's a little small building right next to this one. The Western Union was a big deal. And the lady in there lots of times tell me she needed me to deliver a Western Union and had the stamp, they'd cut that tape and tape it on there.
Yeah.
And I knew everything in town, and I was a kid, so I think I made 10 cents or something like that to take it 2 blocks away or whatever it was. I had just a little deal there. Jimmy Johnson came down to speak at the Rotary. I was a member of the. It wasn't because we were great friends. It was because I furnished a car for the athletic department, and so I got him down here for the speech at the time, and he. That's our JC chapter.
Yes,
some of them.
JCs at the time.
Yeah. That was officers that particular year, but we did a lot for Hugo.
Sounds like it. There's the goat. There's the goat.
Goat just couldn't stay put. Woo, I still get that chewing out. Well, I'd see her 2 or 3 years later, she'd remind me of it. I'm not mentioning her name, but anyway, I had the radio talk show on KIHN for years, and of a morning, and I'd come on and in fact, I would call in, collect after the ball games, the football games, and Bob Kimbrough would broadcast the score and tell them, well, he just called in, folks, and it was Hugo this much, and that was part of my job too. But Lita Henson and I would get on the phone. She was the owner out there, and we'd talk. First of all, about 15. I guess it'd be about. Right around 7:30 in the morning when people were getting ready to go to work. They listened to that, didn't have the TV so much. It was something to be watching. And she would say, I'd just go on, I say, good morning, folks, this is Charles Baggett, birthday and anniversary calendar. I want to send out birthdays today for so-and-so. I've got to hang up on birthdays, but I said, I want to get these people recognized, okay? Well, and I never just say Baggett Motor Company or anything, but I said if you'd like your birthday called out, let us know. And the people called. And the downside, they didn't call when someone died or something. And I've called out a couple over the years.
Yeah.
You keep up with things like that when you're in business. But anyway, we had that. Then we'd come on about 15 minutes till, and we'd talk about, and he'd be one of the DJs, and we'd talk about the ball game, or boy, we got Durant tonight, or something. We brought that in, and after a while they said, "You better sell a car," you know. I go, let me tell you what I just traded for, and it was just that type of deal.
Yeah.
But every day people, and I'm not. I'll leave that out. But anyway, the JCs, I'd get on the radio and I'd say, "Hey, folks, we're gonna have the biggest float. The JC is going to have the biggest float and the best float you've ever seen." And we just made it all up and what all it was going to be. And be sure and come to the parade.
Yeah.
Well, the day of the parade, we had. We thought the parade was next week. We knew what we were doing. We fixed that old Jeep up, and people come down and they'd point at us, laugh at us. You know, we were like we were so dummies. And you know Gene Nesbitt Stadium. Okay, Gene was the Charlie Bob Whibbin is Gene Nesbitt. Okay, but except Gene went and was quiet. He was a sports writer. and Charlie Bob, I had breakfast with him this morning. We're great friends, but he goes to every sporting event, as you know. Good for business. He wears out cars.
Yeah, he does.
But he's a super guy. Well, Gene Nesbitt had an old Chevrolet that he drove to every game. He was a sports writer for the Hugo Daily, and never married. There's Gene Nesbitt right there.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, that's Wayne Caldwell, the guy that I was telling you about the work for the news office. Dad was I was a Shriner too. We did a lot back then, a lot of good. But then this lady here I recognized one time. I said, "I saw that lady. She taught school at Soper. I think she's passed away since then." But I asked some of her relatives, "Is that Linda?" And he said, "It sure is. That's her folks, and everything."
Yeah.
But anyway, just one picture caught it. And this is Stan Stamper's little sisters right here too.
Oh, okay. So there's the little sisters.
Yeah.
And there's Mr. Nesbitt.
Yeah.
And there's the teacher who's speaking about right there.
Gene wrote everything, but he wouldn't hardly say anything.
Right.
We showed you that with the bicycle, and we could just park them. Elephants. Angley Park. You may have that photo. I don't know already. That's little Eddie Angley.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. He was a little bitty guy. Had a I don't know if you heard his commercial. Had a little dog was with him.
The Buster Brown guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he'd say, when you walk the streets of Hugo, he'd have a suit on, he'd have a cigar, a little hat on. But he'd, arf, that's my dog Tyke. And he would, but that was, and some other people, I didn't know some of them, but he would sit there. But he was quite a guy. I'd watch him. Yeah. Going down the streets. Again. Picture recently I got of, and it was more or less to show that we had 3 theaters in town.
Right.
And
yes.
One of them was over here on the main street again. This is going down the street. And that's a little better picture quality-wise. This was a Hugo mattress. M.H. Keelan, it was in my class. Dad had a mattress company here, and they built mattresses and everything. But interesting photo. And then we was talking about Circus USA. Good reference to just about everything.
This is from Life magazine, so
quite a deal there. That's just a picture of my sons when they were in college.
And they went to OSU also?
I went to OSU. And they married, they found their wives there.
Okay.
That's them when they were, that's just a local ad I ran in the paper, but we dressed them like, and everybody thought they were twins because they were about the same size. We'd have little deals, and then that was another ad. And I don't know if you've seen pictures of the Boy Scout cabin in Angley Park ever?
I haven't.
There's a place over there. I took my sons out there one time after, and that hill wasn't near as big as it was.
Right.
Probably wasn't that tall, but it was built on a hill in Angley Park, and they even had some cages like with some monkeys and things that. Not many, but there was also they had a water little place, wading pond, and every Easter the Lions Club had a Easter egg hunt, and you couldn't wait to get out of church till you get to the park to and had prize eggs of all that. But that was the Boy Scout cabin set up on the top of the hill out there at Angley Park, and it was just a unique cabin inside. It was all.
How long were the monkeys there?
A long time. From the time they were probably there at least 10 to 20 years. I don't know, but they were they had a cage for monkeys, and they even had a bobcat in there, I believe, in a cage down. And they were caged.
Yeah.
And of course, kids we'd tease the monkeys. And all that, and get them mad. But original Carlisle, this is a Presbyterian church on down here. There were two houses between, right across from funeral home. And where the insert, they got some, was a ref barbershop there back in there for a while, but that was where we were there from 1945, the used car lot, till I moved out in 1986, and we had that lot. We tore down a couple more houses later. And
the phone number just had 3 digits.
Yeah. 224, and then we had that was 517, the used car lot, and then 303 was our home phone. But then that was my dad's. And I had that sign stolen. I had it in the storeroom, and someone broke in and got it. It's a neon sign right there. Eddie Angley's in this one. There's that park I was telling you about.
Yeah.
And you'll see the little guy there, it's Eddie. I mentioned earlier, I don't know if we had about the alma mater. Did you film that of Bob Grant?
That's the guy that did the music for the alma mater.
Yeah, and
the high school.
And these girls, they did the work, the class after him. They put the words to it, and in fact, one of those is Jim Cummins' sister in that picture, Ann's cousin. I think that's most of that type photos I brought.
That's great.
But I
really like all this. This is wonderful.
We've got lots of other things that I'll share with you later on. But that involving Hugo, all the things that's gone on. Bill Grant came in and started the huge bluegrass deal.
Yes.
Again, the JC, we helped out there, as far as parking cars.
What year did that start?
I don't know. I couldn't quote you.
Okay.
You'll have to look that up.
I know that we went to one there in, 19, had to be, hang on, I know this, 1970.
Okay, well,
and Bill Monroe was there.
Yeah, he came just about every year back then, and out at the place out here in the, we would park cars voluntarily for him and everything to make sure that the program went, was good, and they were super nice people. And I see, JCs were going in 60, 67, 65, 60, they were going strong back in that time. But just watched Hugo grow as we went through different phases. Been blessed to be able to be a participant in a lot of the things we did. The one thing I've always felt like, and I really, I explained to me 2 or 3 times, and I still couldn't accept it. Hugo Lake, there was a guy by the name of Cecil Peters, rural mail carrier, that was a friend of Carl Albert's, but he had this vision of the lake when they talked about it and everything. And Cecil's daughter has this place over on 5th and Kirk, Sammy Jo Thacker, but beautiful home and everything now. She was in my class, and today's her birthday, incidentally.
Oh, okay.
But she, her dad, he was so and he and Carl Albert had been friends for a long time also, and he worked hard on this lake, Hugo Lake. And I didn't have anything to do with that lake.
Right.
It was, and there's 6 gates down there. And I was president of the Chamber of Commerce, and I don't think I brought that picture. I've got it. In 1974, when they closed the gates.
Okay.
Well, they told me one day that I would be closing, I believe it's the 5th gate.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, I didn't have a thing to do with that. I wouldn't feel comfortable closing.
Right.
Because that's,
right.
And they said, well, you're president of the chamber, and we're going to be representative. We were involved, and I said, and you just happen to be president. I said, and I told the board even, I said, there's people in this board that need to be on there. They've worked on this thing hard.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Cecil Peasler wasn't in the chamber board at that time, but he'd worked hard on it. And he got to close one, of course. Carl Albert closed one, and the Corps Engineer General or whatever, and the mayor, if you go, maybe, and me, and I forget now, but, and I've got a picture, and my boys were just babying both of them in one car. She was pushing them, and that's how young they were. Mm-hmm. And I just never felt comfortable that I'd made a contribution to the lake.
Right.
But it was because of the position.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, as president of the OSU Alumni Association, I probably got in on some things too.
Right.
Because of the position. But I was going to tell earlier too that when Wes Watkins, they inducted him into the Hall of Fame of OSU, he called me and he said, and he was congressman, I said, he wanted me to, he said, would you introduce me? And I said, Wes, I said, you've got a lot of people who speak better than I can. I said, why don't you get someone like that? He said, well, they don't know me any better than you do. And I said, well, I'd be honored, because he'd had a pretty tough life. His dad was an alcoholic, and I told it. You know, and I ended it and with a story when I took my boys up to Washington, D.C. when he was congressman. Now, we couldn't go on the floor during session, of course, but we could sit in the gallery. Mm-hmm. And I wish every child in the school system in America could go to Washington, D.C. and see it, and see what this nation's all about and everything. Mm-hmm. But when the boys were probably, I want to say they were 8 and 9 years old in that neighborhood. He takes them down on the floor, and Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House. And after the vote, well, first of all, the one vote came up, and Wes had, one of the boys pushed the button to vote. Yeah. And then after a while, the next one came up, and he got to vote. And I don't mind telling you, the tear came in my eye. I looked down and say, my boys cast a vote, and you know, and they didn't know what they were doing at that time, but they were doing it. But in between, they take them up, and they meet all these congressmen, and he says, they went up, met Tip O'Neill. He was waiting for the vote count. They killing time, and he introduced. Oh, he just loved them. He talked to them all. You know, we got back home, and about a week or two later, Joel hollered, "Dad, come here!" I said, "Tip's on TV." So I go in and I look, and he's telling him, you know, and I said, well, "Son, you refer to him as Mr. Speaker. He's the Speaker." I said, if something happened to a president and vice president, he's the man.
That's right.
I'd give him, you know, a little lesson there and everything. And he says, and I said, you don't call him Tip, you refer to him as Mr. Speaker, and all of them do. And you noticed when they're, he said, well, he told us to call him Tip. I said, good deal. Well, if he told you to, you call him Tip. But they thought that was the greatest thing in the world. But then when we first got up at that weekend, the elevator was in the Cannon building where the freshman congressman is staying. I walked in the deal and got on the elevator, and Wes would call me late at night, and it'd be later there an hour. And I'd already be in bed, and he'd call and wake me up, and we'd talk, and he'd tell me what's going on. Well, I got on the elevator, and there was a paraplegic from Vietnam running the elevator, young guy. And he said, what floor, please? I said, 514. He said, Oh, Congressman Watkins. I said, yeah. I said, we're going to go up and see what he's doing. He said, well, you're going to think I say this to everybody that comes in, but says, Congressman Watkins is the hardest working congressman we have as far as staying in his office. He'll be here early in the morning, he'll be here late. I run midday most of the time, but said I've worked others, and then we would talk about him. And then he looked at me and he said, do you know the difference between Congressman Watkins and all the other congressmen in this building? I said, no, I don't. And I said, we're good friends, but I don't know them. He said, Congressman Watkins knows my name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought, wow, that's Wes.
And that speaks well.
And I told him at that story up there, I said, yeah, everybody hears all about Congressman Watkins and politicians. I said, that's the Congressman Watkins I know. And that's kind of the way I ended it. And he was that sincere, he knew his name.
Right. Well, you've mentioned these people, and I'm a history teacher,
Okay.
so I'm going Raymond Gary
Okay.
is best known for when he was governor, immediately switching Oklahoma over to mixed schools.
Right.
And I just want to hear your comments on that.
Naturally, because he recognized me. But he was really one of the, I won't say the most best Christian men I knew as governor, but he was faithful. He was very, very faithful. Just Dad, he took him one time down. He said, I can't do much except let you go on a deep sea fishing trip that the Army's given for me down in they were on summer camp down, and so Dad and Mr. Perkins and I don't think Hacker went on that trip, but they took him down there, and no alcohol on the ship boat. And he was a straight air guy. He was just really a genuine Christian man, and genuine in every way. And he told you something, it was that way. And he didn't see black and white.
Right. That's good.
Yeah, he didn't see it. He built a nursing home and just practically you stay in it for nothing practically over the deal. Just really one of the finest men I ever knew, and I didn't know him as an adult. But he was really a good guy. He had a lot of good friends here, a lot of good supporters. Once you supported him, you did it. In fact, I've got one of those old Buicks where they had Gary stickers all over, Raymond Gary stickers of 54 maybe. I forget. Then I have a Pontiac that I had is a hatchback with a white with a red half top T-top. They had Wes Watkins because he was, of course, my vintage and friend, but he was. We were in the politics a little, not because of what I never got anything from him, but as far as any perks, but we just believed in supporting the good people.
And Carl Albert,
super guy. Carl Albert did help me out one time. I'll take it back. When I was in service, we did, our barracks got cold. When it was Louisiana, but one September, I guess, or October, it got cold, and we, of course, later on, I thought, here I am. I had a blanket. And some guys serving where didn't have a blanket. But I was complaining, and just in our lower end of the barracks. And some man made a comment, said, man, if you knew a congressman or something, because, you could get it. I slipped over across the deal to a payphone one night, and I called Dad. I said, they tell me this, Dad. And I said, but I don't want to get in trouble because there's only two of us here from the 3rd District in Oklahoma. And even some of these sergeants could figure that out real quick who called. And so I said, we've been going about a week in the rest of the barracks, and I said, it's miserable, you can't. In fact, I slept in my old clothes I wore that day and changed them to my new ones for the next day. And he said, so he called him up, and boy, I mean, the next night when we came in, we had heat.
Wow.
And also, I was sweating. I said, oh my gosh, I'm here forever.
Yeah,
I probably lost my acting jack stripes, but he called him and he said, and I don't want to hear that he had any kind of penalty for doing this. And so, but you know, and then just things like that Carl did a lot of things. Highway 93, Dad grew up at Messer. He asked, Dad said something, and he said, well, he said, excuse me, that was Raymond Gary. He said, Herman, is there anything I can do for you before you, you know, when I'm going out and everything? He said, well, I'd like to see those people at Messer have a paved road. He said, and that old gravel road we went over for many years, and the hill out there, Cason Hill they called it, the old T-models sometimes had to be backed up because gravity flow, no fuel pump, you know, and they'd have to back up if you didn't get a good run at that hill. But he said, I'd like to see those people have a paved road to Hugo. And he said, well, I'll make sure we get that in the budget and everything. And so he put it in, but it was a state highway, and it was Raymond Gary that did that. But I went to Carl Albert's funeral. He was just really a good asset for Hugo. We had some people. He knew people, and he didn't forget them. Even though he was Speaker of the House, he didn't forget them. And he was a politician, but he knew what he was doing. Right. Yeah.
Okay, so you said your dad bought out the dealership in 1952.
Right.
How long did he continue running the dealership?
Actually, he ran it. Well, I'd buy or would get bonuses from some of the programs that they had, and when I came in, I had 25%, I guess it was, early on, and then eventually, and I kept telling him, I said, I want to pay for it. Dad. He said, well, it'll be yours someday anyway. And I said, well, and he's we always, he was very fair with Peggy and I. And I said, well, I want to make sure that that she gets something of equal. He said, well, don't worry, I'll take care. I'll make sure that it does. And he just believed that way. And he told me when I first came in 65, I guess, 64 or 5, that I started selling. He told me, he said, "Now, son," he says, "if we know a car's burning oil when we trade for it, we know it when it left, and you tell the people." Yeah. And he says, then they know what they got. Yeah. And we didn't, and he says, in a small town, you cannot do that, And so we would, he just told me, and I had to get burned a couple of times from people I didn't think would lie to you, that you'll take the tires off of it after you traded for it, stuff like that. That's typical. And he was used to, he knew the ropes, and he knew, but he'd let me get burned. And this is a true story. We worked together from 64 or 5, and well, in fact, it was January 65. But anyway, we worked together, and I'd work in the summer selling too. But from until he died in 71, and we were side by side there, and we never had but one disagreement in our whole life. Our whole life. Right. It wasn't business related. It was. I always say we only had one disagreement, and he won it. Okay. and I'll tell you the story on it if you got time. Yeah. There was only one tennis court in Hugo. Yeah. Is at First Word School, and of course everybody wanted to play the weekend, and so I was into tennis, and we took turns, and they challenged the winner that day, and you sometimes play all day just about. But and I complained to Dad. I said, well, and now the Jordans had one for their daughter. She played tennis, but it was a black asphalt court. But he built it for her. But we didn't play on it. They were wealthy, but so she, but he. So the Lions Club had the park over, and in Third Ward School over there. There was a park there at that time. Well, Dad talked the Lions Club into building 2 tennis courts over there. And because primarily that I played tennis, and they needed it.
Yeah.
And this was before the Walter Leonard deal, of course, out at by the stadium. And so they built it. Well, in the construction, they had the the concrete poured, and that's about all. They didn't have the deal. Well, we go over there, and Ken Brown, it was just his dad. Ken was just wiring and whatever he could do, and so. But he was one of the first that had his dad had a salvage yard out to town where Hicks is. Ken gets a speaker and puts it in the grill between the radiator and the bumper and everything in his car, ties it in, and we could listen to the radio.
Right.
We go over to the deal over there and pull up on there, and we're dancing. You know, just good, clean fun. Just we were good kids. We weren't doing anything, and that's what we're doing. Well, they called the police. Some people with the police. These kids over here just loud noise, blah, all this. So I got home. In fact, my date at that time was Carolyn Fry.
Right.
We were dating in high school. And he said, and I told him, I said, Dad, I need to tell you something. I said, police ran us off. Told him the story. He said, son, says, we didn't build it. We're not building it. I said, you know, I've worked my tail off to get this for you and your friends and everything, and tennis people. We need it. But he said, it's not made to hold up a car. It's made for tennis.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. Well, and I said, I want to tell you before you heard it. And I said, you know, and we've always had that arrangement. And same way with my boys. You know, I knew everything that night. So, you know how kids can be smart mouth at times.
Yeah.
Well, the Lions Club every year would have a deal, and they'd have for little kids, and you'd be fishing for you put hang over the building, and then put a gift on it and pull it back over, and all kinds of swinging deals, and just for kids, little kids. Well, that was the park, a Lions Club Park, they called it, and there's a wading pond there. There's a big wading pond that people and so. But they had about 5 or 6 pickups parked up there with these. Out of the back of them, you operate. Some of them had Cokes and you could and things like that. Well, you go by, you know, and I'm walking along, and I said, I didn't know this was made to hold the weight of a pickup or a car.
Yeah.
I can still see him looking at me. He said, I think you probably need to take your date home and go on home. And I did. Boy, I was sweating. And when he came in, he said, let me tell you something one more time, how hard I worked on this.
That's right.
And so I don't need to hear some smart boy tell me about this. He says, because we don't have to put that rest of that fence up.
Yep.
And I said, I'll just pay them for whatever. We got this far. And so that was the only disagreement we ever had in our whole life. I'm serious. And there'd be times they'd come in and he'd say, well, something, he traded with something. I said, well, no wonder they traded if you put that much in that car. He'd go sell it, prove to me that he knew what he was doing. And he'd stop by and he'd say, have you sold anything lately? I said, well, I've got one got out. And he'd say, well, I just sold 2. I wasn't going to leave until I sold. And we competed that way, but it was fun. And for an uneducated man, he was smart.
So how long did you run the dealership?
Oh gosh, from not long after I got out. Let's see, probably I know in '68, I'd probably maybe half owner at the time, somewhere in there, and then. And he gave me part of it. Don't get me, I'm not going to deny that. But part of it, you know, I wanted to pay for it because he had earned it and everything.
Right.
And then I guess in somewhere around, I don't remember what year that could have been. Sometime in the late '70s, perhaps, is when I finished. And I know I got Chevrolet and Oldsmobile later when they finally shut that down. And so, and then I stayed there till 90. Sold it in '93.
'93.
But loved every minute. Loved the day I walked out.
Oh yeah.
Sold a car the day I walked out, and just really loved it. We were down at the old place one day, and this couple from Paris. We had a tremendous business from Paris, new car business, and we were selling like 30 new pickups a month and 15 cars or whatever. But this lady that I sold him a blue LeSabre Buick, and I look up, and Dad is standing outside my office where they can't see him, and he's motioning to me, come out here. So I go in, and he had some customers. Now I'd already got them. The girls were doing the paperwork, and at this time you had to wait to type up everything proper and all that. Well, it didn't have all the computers and all this.
GMAC and all that.
Yep. Well, we waited, and so, but it was good for me because I learned a little bit about the people, and then I could remember them and take them over. And so he said, "Are you selling that blue Buick to them?" He knew I was selling that blue Buick. The girls were doing the paperwork when he went in. He said, "Yes." I said, "Yeah." I said, he said, "The girls do." He said, "Well, I've sold it to these people in my office." Well, his people were after, they weren't.
Oh boy.
So he says, "I tell you what," says, "you're a lot better salesman than I am." Says, "Why don't you get them another one and tell them you'll get them another one?" Okay. All I heard was what I wanted to hear all my life, that you're a lot better salesman than I am.
Yep.
I didn't hear anything else. I didn't think about what else was coming.
Yep.
I go back and tell my people that Dad sold it, I said, "But I'll get you one." Took me, we didn't have modern computers then that you could find one. I called every dealer in the state, and I called the Buick office, told them, I said, "I'm hurt now, we got to get these people a car, and this equipment and this price." And I got them one and saved the deal. But I walked back, and both couples had left. And he's in his chair, and he looks up, kind of smirking, I said, "You do that to your own son." he says, "What?" I said, "You know what?" I said, "All I heard was you're a lot better salesman than I am."
Yeah.
But we had fun.
Yeah,
we really did. And when I built the building, he said, "Don't build me a building. Don't build me an office." I said, I don't need it. I'm out. And I said, "Well, you're out there looking after it when I had to go to meetings and things." And I said, "You're just, he wouldn't do it." So I told him the adjacent room there was for the conference room. We'd have it. And I'm walking in, and he said, "I wouldn't have put carpet in this. You're going to have cokes and eating in here." I said, "That's too smart." I said, "Well, that's probably a good idea." But I said, I ordered it, and I will. Orange carpeting, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
But so he's, then when I ordered furniture, nice furniture, and a big sofa where he could sleep on if he wanted to, and we shared a bathroom, and behind we had a little hallway and everything. But when he walked in and saw that big desk and credenza and everything, I said, "You're going to have the finest office in Hugo," and at the time it was. And I said, "You deserve it," and he just couldn't believe it, He just was, but he deserved it. He started out.
So what'd you do after you sold the dealership?
Good Lord looks after me so well. Well, I called Larry Dyson over at Durant, and then and some of the other dealers around, and I said, "I'm thinking about going out buying program cars at the auctions and just give them something to do here." And he said, "Fine." And I said, "If you'll buy from me," he said, I trust you with my money, and said, I don't want to go and be away from the store." And I get up to the sale, and some other buddy says, "What are you doing? I thought you sold out." I said, "Well, I'm buying cars, I guess, 2 or 3 days a week."
Yeah.
Well, I was going to Albuquerque and working in Dallas one day, Albuquerque the next, San Antonio the next, flying everywhere and going all over, but it got me out of my house.
Yeah.
Good Lord knew that I was not happy going home at night, and so perfect job for me. I knew what I was doing, and I'd been in it all my life, and I was buying 850 cars a year, buying for dealers and sending them to them. And I'd just say, and they tell me I'm still buying online today because we can't go to the sale. But last year when I was still buying cars, and it's just in my blood. I can't keep from it. And they'll call me. I'm just kind of like a cattle buyer. They say, They'll call me first of the week. I send a card out to all the dealers a sheet that tells how many Buick Regals are there, how many Chevrolet Impalas are there, whatever. And I send it out to them where I'll be. And now we only have 2 sales a week, and that I work Kansas City and Dallas, and I'm having to work them online now. But I was traveling, but I told I said this perfect job for me, and I enjoy doing it, and I would build up a lot of points, and I got to take my grandson places and fly with me and do things that we traveled free of charge because I was earning all these bonuses. I was buying so many cars, the auction was paying my airfare and my hotel. And so you didn't have a lot of expenses, and I loved doing it. But I'd order them. I'd go in and buy the cars, and went as far as Hattiesburg, I guess that way, and Albuquerque and Kansas City, St. Louis, but worked all over. Enjoyed every minute of it, and still do. I look forward to doing it, but it's just in your blood.
So you mentioned the JCs, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Lions Club.
I was in Rotary. Dad was in Lions.
Okay, you were in Rotary. Dad was in Lions. Any other community organizations or things?
Oh, I've been involved with the starting of the Comitia Opportunities, one of the finest things I've ever associated with. We you probably didn't remember Rabbi Estes, we called him. He was
I've heard so many good things about him.
He would come in offices. I told him you'd have to cook burgers Friday night. I said, Rabbi, I'm not even going to be in town Friday. He said, I said, I don't want to miss the game, but he says, well, you just be out there. I told him you'd be there. And you didn't tell him no. You could not tell him no. So he says, listen, and he had a brother that was had some mental problems and everything. Super nice guy, but he was just he'd come down from Kansas City sometime, and he got friendly with people. He'd come in the stores and things, and people knew who he was, and but he said, I've called people from the State Department, and I said, I want you to be at the meeting we're going to have. I said, I can't serve on the board. I'm sorry. It's a good cause, but I said, man, I'm right in the middle of this building, getting this building done, and I said, I just can't do it. So he goes up there. We hear the program. I hear the program, and he said, okay, he says, I'd like to put Charles on there as president. I said, I'm not going to be president. I can't. I'm telling you. Oh yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. Well, we form it, and I served on it. We have a deal where you serve like 2 years and then go off a year, and then you can be eligible again.
Right.
And I've pretty well stayed eligible. I told him this time. I said, you got some good young people on here now. And I said, I don't need to be back on it and everything. But it's been really a good operation, and it's helped so many people. One of the things that touched me most in his life, I guess, was I was at the bank, and a little girl came in, and she'd seen me and knew who I was, and because we'd have Christmas parties and things for them all, and she said, come here. And she saw me in the bank. She said, what's this? She'd gotten her check and she's sitting there, and they do work, and they get we pay them, and she had learned to write her name, and she wrote it in cursive, and she wrote it out, and took her I don't know how long, and she said, look what I can do, and she wrote her name. She's so happy, and it gets you.
Yeah, it does. What do you think people not from Choctaw County would like to know about us?
I love to tell them about the past, because they always think that's the greatest time in the world. But it's great now. I think here's 2 people not from here.
That's it. Yep.
Concerned with knowing the history, keeping the history positive. We've had so many people come in that did take charge, were involved in it and everything, and moved in here or whatever. A lot of the JCs came in with public service company.
Right.
Right. They were and just as active as they can be. But I think, be honest, I get sick when I go downtown and see the old stores I remember full
Right.
on the main street there. It's not unique to Hugo, Oklahoma.
Right.
It's I'm not a big advocate of the marijuana stores or any dope of any kind, or whatever.
Right.
But I'll get in trouble for saying that, I'm sure, but I don't care. It's not my deal. But we don't have any businesses left, and it's a shame because some of the best merchants in the world were ever down there. And my dad went to work where he learned to sell was the Shermans that had a little. I mean, it wasn't 25 feet wide, I guess.
Right.
But he believed that everybody coming in ought to buy something. And when Dad started working for him to sell them, he said, "What'd they buy?" And he said, "Oh, they didn't buy anything." He said, "We'll sell them a handkerchief. You know, they can buy a handkerchief." And he believed in selling them something when he came in. And that's where he learned to sell them something before they left, because he didn't want to face Mr. Sherman.
Yeah.
And later on, and people say, "Oh, you're not good." They were Jewish people, and he said, "They're not going to contribute." I go up and get Christmas light decoration. I get, donation, in Little League. He said, I'd walk in. He said, "Well, what we're raising money for today?"
Yep.
And I said, "I don't know, but we need a lot." and he'd listen to my story, and if the Little League program started back up, and he'd write us a check for $100 back then, and just that was a lot of money. But he had no kids, but he wanted to support it, and it was no trouble. People were involved, and we had doctors were involved. Dr. Wolf, Jamie Wolf's dad, he was the Dr. Mike back then.
Right.
Went to all the sporting events. Loved sporting. Played in high school and everything, and he just was really. I think of that every time I see Dr. Mike out there. But you worry about any small town, and as much as we were involved in civic work, and everything, I think our things like Votech will continue to go good. I really do. We and a lot of agencies, you see agencies move out. That's typical. So many times of cutbacks at government agencies and things that you lose an office. But there's always something wanting to come, and my dad owns some property out where the new Indian complex is out here, and he said, "Son, if you want to build out there," he had 15 acres. Said, "I'll give you 5 acres. I'll give you all of it if you want to build."
Right.
And I said, "Well, Dad, the price is right," but I said, "That's the wrong direction." And so I went out here, paid more money per acre, quite a bit per acre to get that property there, but it was the right move, and because at that time, other than Fridays, there was not much traffic going west, and the town wasn't growing west, and but you see all these new things going up all the way out. I'm optimistic. I'm be honest, and my dad tried to talk me of going someplace else and working. He said, "Hugo's not. We're not financially strong, and a new car dealership's tough." And Ed Wallace was been a good operator all his life, and he was, he's done well. But he said, "You should go." Well, when I decided I was going to sell, I called him, and I went to see him. I said, "I've got an opportunity to sell the dealership, and I'm thinking about doing it. But if either one of you want to come back to join, you're more." They were both in business, school business.
Yeah.
And both of them said, "Well, Dad, we've seen the bright lights of the big city, and said we think we'll not go in the car business."
Right.
And of course, it's long hours.
Oh, yeah.
And didn't understand that people call you in the middle of the night sometime and having car troubles and stuff, things like that. But they've both done extremely well, and so I'm thankful for that. and they made the right decision, and more than I'd love to see them come in and be active in making the city grow, but helping with it. But it's a tougher job now than it was then. We just had, in my dad's group, probably our JC bunch was good, but we didn't have money. But Dad's age group had people that they were comfortable financially. Mm-hmm. They were interested in Hugo, and the chamber meetings would be, there'd be 30 people at a chamber board meeting, and mostly businessmen, mm-hmm. Women, and they, Betty Sue, Betty Jean Cannon was very active, had the florist shop here at the time, mm-hmm. and just, but they had the money to do it, is what I'm saying.
Right.
If they want to go to get Wells Lamont down here, they can afford it and everything, where there wasn't many of the JCs that could just go put money in it, and the wife not be upset with it. Mm-hmm. Anybody from running, trying to get industry or something. But it's different. I haven't given up on Hugo by any means, and we've had some real sharp people here involved in a lot of things, but it's different. It's a lot different growing up. I never locked my car in high school in the park, and might have my shotgun in the back or somewhere, But you just didn't do that. But it's not many houses had locks on the door.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's